What's up everyone, it's King Moose here with JCross X to welcome you all back for episode 47 of Class Overview. For those who aren't familiar, the Class Overview series is a collection of informative videos where we're going to be discussing the different classes in Fire Emblem 3 houses. We'll be going over general information about each class, like their certification requirements, stats, abilities, and their overall strengths and limitations to determine their viability and what units are a good fit for each class. As per usual, these videos will be gameplay focused, so there shouldn't really be any major spoilers, but I advise you anyways to watch your own discretion, and if you haven't played 3 houses yet, you absolutely should. This episode will be focused on the War Master class. It's a 6-move class with standard infantry movement, as opposed to the superior thief-like movement archetype of Grappler and Brawler, which take reduced movement penalties on certain tiles like forest tiles. It's a purely physical class, so it allows access to Brawling, but disables access to a unit spell list. Moving on to class abilities, War Master has Axe Fair, which increases the damage deal with axes by 5, as well as Fist Fair, which increases the damage deal with gauntlets or unarmed combat by 5. Finally, it has Crit plus 20, which adds a flat 20 to your crit stat regardless of what you're attacking with. In order to certify for War Master, you'll need at least an A rank in Axes and an A rank in Brawling, though it can be gamble with a bit lower. It's very important to mention that War Master is gender locked to male units only, so you can't put any female unit in this class. However, female Byleth can at least get this class's mastery ability Quicker Post and New Game Plus if it was unlocked by male Byleth in a previous playthrough. For units going down the Brawling path, War Master isn't too difficult to reach, since every physical unit will want to raise axes to at least C anyways early in the game for Death Blow. For units going down the Axe path, the certification is definitely a lot harder, though a lot of units do use Gauntlets as a secondary weapon type, so it's not too difficult. As for skill rank bonuses, War Master grants a plus 3 skill XP boost to both Axes and Brawling. These will help you pick up Axe Prowess 5 and Brawling Prowess 5 at the A plus rank sooner, but the main benefit is to rush for S rank as fast as possible for Axe Crit plus 10 and Brawl Crit plus 10, which synergize very well with the class's innate Crit plus 20. War Master is obviously intended to be an endgame class, and there's no class in the game that requires a higher rank than A in Axes or Brawling, so these skill rank bonuses won't be helpful for any promotion or reclassing options.
The base stats of War Master are pretty standard. Despite this, it has one major standout, which is Strength sitting at a base of 20, making it the highest in the entire game. Being a physical class partially focused on Brawling, its magical bases are obviously bad at 10 for both Magic and Res. As per usual, the Dex and Luck sit at 14 and 12, the highest in the game, tied with all the other Master classes and Barbarossa. It has the second highest HP of the Master classes behind Great Knight sitting at a 33 base, while its defense and speed are pretty average at 15 and 16 respectively. At this point, given how difficult some certifications are, you don't normally use Master classes to patch up stats. However, if you got extremely unlucky with strength level ups in the advanced stage, you could see an increase in your strength during the transition into this class. As for growth rates, they're honestly quite good and min-maxed into the stats you want for this class. It has the highest HP growth in the game at a staggering plus 40% growth modifier, tied with its predecessor, Grappler. Additionally, it has a plus 50% growth to strength, which is also tied for a few other physical classes for the highest in the game. Lastly, we have a plus 10% growth modifier to speed and a mostly negligible but still appreciated plus 5% growth to charm, whilst having no growth penalties. Honestly, for a physical class like War Master, this is about one of the best spreads you can ask for and we don't really have any complaints here. Lastly, we have the boosts, which follow the growth pretty closely. The standout here is once again Strength, however, as the boost sits at a very intimidating plus 5, which is the highest in the game and especially useful in a class that can utilize Gauntlets effectively. It also has a few other good boosts, like its plus 2 to speed, which can be useful for faster War Masters if you're trying to quad. As for bulk, it has a plus 3 to HP and a plus 1 to defense, which is also pretty decent. Lastly, the class also randomly has a plus 1 to luck, but given this class crit-focused identity, this is actually somewhat helpful. Overall, War Master has some pretty good stat spreads, and for what it wants to do, you couldn't really ask for much better.
Mastering War Master unlocks both an exclusive combat art and a transferable ability. Let's start off with the combat art. War Master Strike is an Axe combat art, obviously only usable on this class, and it doesn't take up one of your combat art slots. In a vacuum, this is a very good combat art. For a reasonable durability cost of 5, it grants a massive plus 30 to hit, and a somewhat underwhelming plus 3 to might. However, because of its special effect, it's a lot stronger than the number gives it credit for. War Master Strike applies the bonus effectiveness multiplier, like the one you get when you use Night Kneeler against a cavalry unit for example, against all enemies regardless of what class they're in. Mathematically, this works by doubling the might of your weapon in the damage calculation, providing a very significant boost of damage. However, there's an unfortunate issue with this combat art. Not only is it unlocked very late in the game, but it's almost always outclassed by the very first Axe combat art all units get, Smash. Compared to War Master Strike, Smash costs the same durability, has the same might boost, and comes with a massive plus 20 crit boost in exchange for 10 less hit. This crit boost is the main factor here, since due to War Master's innate crit plus 20, this class's identity is centralized around crit stacking. Using Smash with the Killer Axe to pretty much guarantee crits on player phase is usually just a better strategy than clicking War Master Strike. Not only is the crit multiplier times 3 instead of the times 2 effect in this multiplier, but the crit multiplier applies after everything in the base damage calculation instead of just the weapon might, so crits with Smash will significantly outdamage non-crits with War Master Strike. Of course, If your crit rates are high enough that you can still guarantee crits using War Master Strike instead of Smash, then War Master Strike will deal more damage. It can also be useful in cases where crits are unreliable and you'd rather just have the extra 10 hit. But from our experience, we find these cases to be very situational, so focusing on Smash is usually the better strategy. In direct contrast to War Master Strike, which is an exclusive player phase kill tool, the Mastery ability of War Master is a transferable enemy phase ability, Quick Riposte. It has 2 activation conditions. Your HP must be at least 50% of your max HP, and an enemy must initiate combat with you rather than you initiating combat with them. When those conditions are met, Quick Riposte activates. It essentially overrides the attack speed check to guarantee that you will double that enemy, and prevents them from doubling you, regardless of your actual attack speed or the enemy's attack speed. Obviously, this is an insanely strong effect, especially on slow units who are basically never going to double enemies and always get double when attacked. It also makes gauntlets way more usable in the enemy phase, since normally they deal low damage due to losing their brave effect. It synergizes well with the class itself, since doubling makes it way more likely to land at least one crit. This ability is often considered to be one of the absolute strongest in the game, and it's pretty obvious why. The main issue with it is that it's unlocked so late in the game because it's the mastery ability of a master class, so you realistically only get a few chapters of use out of it. However, as you can imagine, it's completely broken in New Game Plus, where you can just bypass that downside and unlock it early. The only other issue is that it requires high HP, when every other HP reliant ability instead relies on low HP, so that reduces its synergy. It would be really broken combined with abilities like Vantage and Wrath, but that's only possible if a unit is at exactly 50% HP, which is extremely difficult to pull off and maintain.
War Master is a very strong class with a number of things going for it to reinforce that statement. First, we can talk about something unique to this class, which is crit plus 20. It's the only class in the game to get this ability, and plus 20 is a pretty significant amount when it comes to crit. The other classes that give crit only boost crit by 10 for a specific weapon type, and this also applies to the S rank skill as well. Plus 20 crit to all your attacks is very nice, and it makes crit stacking on this class extremely easy to the point the only thing you generally have to worry about is accuracy, especially if you are using axes. This ability makes it very flexible as to which phase you want to utilize it on, especially when equipped with something like a Killer Axe Plus. It provides a lot of versatility on top of the fact that this class already uses some of the best weapon types in the game, being axes and gauntlets. This versatility also applies into its masteries. Although not perfect, War Master Strike is still a good combat art and it doesn't take up a slot, so when you need it, you have access to it in the player phase. Quick Riposte is also one of the best masteries, and it helps the class out in the enemy phase a ton, especially with the slower units as Josh just mentioned. Keeping your units at high HP is not too difficult, especially for tankier War Masters, so you can definitely get a fair amount of value out of it despite unlocking it so late. Moving on to more generic stuff, which is the stats and the fact that the class is grounded. I discussed earlier how the stats are pretty min-max and well distributed, and the plus 5 to strength is very appealing, improving this class's already good kill power by quite a bit. The other boosts are quite appreciated, whilst also having good growths and no penalties either. As for the grounded aspect, having healing and guard adjutants on a War Master is pretty handy if you want to stay at higher HP thresholds, and also improves the list of battalions you can utilize, which is important for War Master since you generally want to have one that has extra crit, as well as physical damage and protection if possible.
War Master doesn't have a whole lot of weaknesses to discuss. The biggest one is probably the movement. 6 move isn't bad, but it does lag behind a lot of the best endgame classes. This is most noticeable in comparing it to Wyvern Lord, its biggest competition as an Axe Fair class. Wyvern Lord has 8 move, Flight, and Canto, which frankly just makes it run circles around War Master. Even when comparing it to the other brawling options, which are all infantry, War Master comes up just a little short. Grappler has thief-like movement and War Monk has mage-like movement. Both those movement archetypes take reduced movement penalties on most tiles compared to infantry movement. You can really feel the difference on maps with a lot of forest tiles or sand tiles. While on the topic of comparing War Master to Grappler, the only other thing War Master suffers from is that it doesn't have nearly as strong of an exclusive combat art. War Master Strike is decent, but it just doesn't compare to Fierce Iron Fist, which single-handedly carries units, allowing pretty much any unit to one-round enemies with ease. Of course, War Master has the advantages of a Grappler and has plenty of one-rounding potential of its own, usually with crit builds. However, usually War Masters are harder to build so they have to maximize crit in addition to might, and require the unit themselves to bring more to the table statistically in order to do so. When using Grappler on the other hand, you can often just turn your brain off and click Fierce Iron Fist to kill anything as long as you have Death Blow. This is an unfortunate comparison for War Master because Grappler is available 10 levels earlier and requires half the investment. You can also count the gender lock as a weakness of the class, though we're not going to knock it too hard for this since it also applies to one of its main competitors, Grappler, and honestly, there's only maybe a few female units who War Master would be a good fit for anyways.
Taking all that into account, we have decided on a 9 out of 10 for War Master. Honestly, the class is a crit monster with probably some of the best dual phasing capabilities in the game. It's a very versatile class with good stats, a nice pair of masteries, great class abilities, and overall just a strong unit for combat. Although its player phase isn't as broken as its predecessor, it's still a great class and there's a decent amount of units you can recommend for it. With that being said, our standout is once again Felix, which is the same as the Grappler video, but by this time it's by a very close margin over a couple units we will talk about shortly. As for Felix himself, a lot of the reasoning here lies in his stats, as he bolsters some of the best growths in the game with a whopping 55% strength growth. He is also a realistic option for quadding during the player phase, given his speed growth is at 55% as well, and this class boosts speed a decent bit. His dex and luck growth sit at 45% and 40% respectively, meaning he usually has a pretty easy time crit stacking in this class. Additionally, he has a boon in brawling, and even though he's only neutral in axes, it's still very much worth it for him to push into this class in our opinion. His Cressor Faldara still helps him out quite a bit here, although probably not as much as on Grappler, since sometimes it activating as he crits is a complete overkill. The fact it has eye activation and can trigger multiple times on gauntlet hits is still appreciated though. Male Bioth is also here for very similar reasons. Good growths in strength, speed, luck, and dex, a boon in brawling, and having a good crest assuming you actually want to be at high HP thresholds. The Crest of Flames can be pretty annoying if you want to focus mostly on enemy fades builds, since it often brings you above 50% HP, disabling Wrath Vantage setups, but he's still a good unit for this class regardless. As for other recommendations, Balthus, Dedu, and Raphael share a lot in common. Great strength growth, a boon in both axes and brawling, as well as being pretty slow. The fact that they are slow means gauntlets help them out quite a bit to take advantage of their high strength, but quick riposte is definitely a very worthwhile pickup for these units, and as such, mastering War Master for them is advised. Caspar and Alois aren't as slow, but they have slightly worse strength than those three units. However, they are statistically decent and have boons in brawling and axes too, making their certification just as easy. An important thing to note, but the majority of the units I just mentioned also have access to Battalion Wrath, making crit stacking even easier in the enemy phase. Lastly, we have a funny and unironically good War Master build, Ignatz. If you are able to stack as much damage and strength as possible on him, his personal combined with his dex and luck generally means you'll be very accurate and crit pretty much all of the time. He is unfortunately neutral in both axes and brawling, but he's still a very solid endgame option for him if you want to build around it.
Overall, we're going to give War Master an A tier placement, but before you get too angry, we will at least clarify this class along with Darkflyer are the closest to moving up to S tier. We understand that it may be a little controversial to say that Grappler is a better class than War Master, even if only slightly better. Our logic for this is very similar to placing Bow Knight below Sniper. The amount of units who would prefer War Master over Grappler is roughly equal to the amount that would prefer Grappler over War Master. However, Grappler gets the advantage because it's available earlier and therefore provides a large power spike when unlocked and gets to contribute on more maps. That's just our personal logic and standards for how we rate classes though, so if you think War Master is a better class than Grappler and belongs in S tier, we completely understand. Either way, it's a very strong class, and the elite tier of Master classes and endgame class options in general, and we highly recommend using it. That's basically all I have to say about the War Master class. If you like the video or have any thoughts of your own, please leave a like and make sure to comment. I also recommend checking the description if you're not already subscribed to both of our channels. Stay tuned for episode 48, the finale of class overview on JCross's channel, where we'll be moving on to the last Master class, Gremory.